ever since October 7th, you've become a prominent speaker and defender of Israel.
Let me finish.
I'm not saying
Let
that
me
that's...
finish my sentence.
Okay.
Why is there a turn then on the Jews?
I don't think that it ever went away. All of these ideals actually developed in the wake of the Holocaust.
I'm really frustrated with the complete distortion of the narrative.
The story that is portrayed in the media is bullshit. October 7th happened, and it was like, no, we like the jihadists. You go to the Middle East, you go to Africa, you go to China, the oppressors are not white people. You're watching these massacres in the millions right in front of you, and you do not give a rat's behind because it's not a white oppressor.
You said that Iran have been playing a long game to try and take down America from within.
So...
Did you feel this way about the Israel-Palestine issue before? When you said earlier you were a bit woke?
No. I was pro-Palestine.
You were pro-Palestine?
Yes.
Why were you pro-Palestine?
I didn't know at that time that there was never a place or a state called Palestine. When you learn things like this, it makes you question, why was I told that?
Yeah.
That's not true, so why was I told something that wasn't true? And then you start scratching under the surface for all the other things, and then you're like, none of this is true.
Before you hear from Elica Lebon, I note that this conversation was had in Los Angeles before the election at the end of October. So some of the geopolitics changed. In fact, some had changed even by the day after of the recording. Keep that in mind whilst you're listening. Before you hear from Elica Lebon, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press like, comment and subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Elica discussing the issues you want to hear about and the mainstream media won't touch. But without further ado, here she is, Elica Lebon. Well, Elica, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me here in your new home of Los Angeles.
Thank you. I wouldn't call it new, but yes.
You've been here a while?
Like 7-8 years, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're
but new compared to, I don't know, a past life, maybe.
A past life back in Blighty, back in London.
Yes, well, I was talking about an actual past life, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right, okay.
Yeah, back in Blighty,
okay.
where you are.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Well, so viewers will have seen you pugnaciously taking on the likes of Dave Smith on Piers Morgan and all sorts of people. Ever since October 7th, you've become a prominent speaker and defender of Israel, I would say, and these very compelling videos on social media and a powerful voice. I don't know your actual story, though. So I know you're British and Iranian. I thought you might have been American, but you're not. As if you explained to me before the cameras started rolling. Can I ask your story? How did you get? How did you get here?
I was born and raised in London. I think to get to the abridged version, where I come to America for law school in 2017. Okay, skip past that. 2022, Mahsa Amini is killed in Iran for improperly showing her hair. And this kind of kicks off this revolution in Iran, the Woman Life Freedom movement. And the whole movement is about freeing Iran from this terrorist regime, right? And so for a year of activism, it's basically just explaining to people why these are terrorists, which is kind of a strange thing to have to explain to people, but coming out from this post kind of woke era where people, for some reason, that kind of led to an extremism in and of itself, where it was brown people can't do bad things, and so it was so they can, and they are, right? And then that was going, okay, I would say to a degree, that it had some kind of public discourse around it here. There was a degree of people that were like, okay, we're actually interested in what's going on in Iran, what's going on in Afghanistan. And it was like, okay, great. And then October 7th happened, and it was just all of that just disappeared from their minds. And it was like, no, we like the jihadists. And it's remember how for the past year we were talking about jihadists are bad? And they were like, no, but these are different jihadists. These are freedom fighting jihadists. And it's like, no, same jihadists, same thing, exactly the same thing. Just the only difference is that they haven't succeeded in their goal of creating a state under Sharia law, which is their goal. And in Iran, they have succeeded. And so why are you backing something that we're trying to undo somewhere else? And so that became, and then of course, because we're talking about these proxies of the regime, right? We're talking about the proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and then, you have extensive, more Islamic Palestinian Jihad and proxies in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and so forth. And it's like we're looking at this as an empire. And you're trying to take this piecemeal and say, well, maybe these ones are freedom fighters and maybe this one is resistance and maybe this is this. It's all the same thing.
It's an axis of evil.
Yes.
But they don't see it that way.
They don't see it that way.
I'd love to come back to that and what happened October 7th, but you're Iranian born, right?
I was born in London, but my parents are...
Your parents are Iranian.
Mm-hmm.
And so why did they come to London?
So my dad was under the Shah's regime. So the Shah was the last king of Iran. The Shah's regime, they were... so Iran was becoming very, very progressive at that time. And the Shah's regime sent out a lot of top university students to different places in the world to get their education. So my dad was like a top student at one of the universities. And so the Shah's regime sent him to Oxford to get his PhD. Now, while he was at Oxford, the revolution happened. So he had to, so they cut off his bursary, of course, because the government was done, and he had to drop out. And then he sought asylum in the UK and he became a British citizen. At the same time, my mum was in Iran. She and her family were... had the experience of what happened once the regime came to Iran. So she went to Evin prison. Her sister, my aunt, went to Evin prison, and her husband.
What's Evin prison? Is that a notorious
prison? It's the notorious, yeah. So,
in Tehran?
Mm-hmm. So in the 80s, when the regime was in its nascent years, when it was just formed, that was essentially when it was its most brutal in its first 10 years of life. So... the walkway to Evin prison, it was lined with a row of hanged bodies so that you know what you're getting into and that you don't come out of Evin prison. So my aunt, my mum's sister, she was pregnant with my cousin at the time, my cousin Morale. And I mean, they fed her so much poison or whatever. My cousin was born with epilepsy. They ended up letting her go before she gave birth, but they hanged her husband. So
what were their crimes? What was your mother?
Nothing. Like nothing. Someone that was against the regime was seen with my mum. She went to my mum's house, and then so they arrested my mum. It was like my mum's cousin, and then when my mum was in prison, the cousin turned herself in, so they hanged her. And they let my mum go. But they would have killed my mum if the cousin didn't turn herself in.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So you were brought up then in a household where you're surrounded by talking about these issues.
Yeah. And then so then my mum got very sick actually after that. So she needed a special visa to go to the UK to get treatment. That's where she met my dad and they got married and were British citizens. And then my aunt and my cousin, who now has no dad, moves in with us in the house. So it's just, we're being raised in this like chaos and trauma of, everything that had come out of this revolution. Now, my dad's no longer at Oxford. He's jobless, unemployed. My mum, same thing. My aunt, her husband has just been executed by this terrorist regime. My cousin's born with epilepsy and all of this crap because of, what happened in prison. And it's just very chaotic, and it's a very first-hand experience of what it means to be subject to this experience of these just real damaging regimes.
So fast forward then to October 7th, as you said, suddenly your peers or your contemporaries who had previously engaged with you in the clear misogyny of the Iranian regime or the
well, they were actually, it's interesting because there were a lot of them that were quite silent during that year. and then suddenly found their voice on October 7th, which was a very clear to me.
Was it 2017? What year?
2022. So it was the year just before. Right, yeah. It was the year it was exactly almost 1 year to the date, because the anniversary of Mahsa Amini's death was September, and then it was October 7th that this happened. So it was a year and a month later, essentially. There were some people that had said some things about Iran. I mean, a lot of my best friends just watched me for the whole year, really losing my mind, didn't really say much. But then when they started speaking after October 7th, it was clear that it was just like part of the established narrative. It was like, oh, this is what we're talking about. And so now we're going to talk about this. Yeah. And I was like, okay.
That's clear. And is that the movement that Masih Alinejad led?
Yes.
And is that the white, it always had another name, the white something movement, maybe not. You know, I noticed another thing happened similarly where my progressive friends would be prepared to engage with the work of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, particularly when it came to FGM in certain countries. But then as soon as, same thing, October 7th, it seems to flip, which is a bizarre one. You've spoken about why you think that might be, and I'm not sure I totally understand why that is. And you've also talked about, so let me ask first about your peers before talking more broadly about progressives and the left. Why is it that you are, I understand your position on Iran, but you could, I suppose, have taken a different position on Hamas. If you had gone along with your peers. Why do you think differently? Or maybe why do they think differently? What is it that's motivated them? How have they come to such a drastically different position to you?
I think that in order to understand the conflict between Israel and Palestine, one needs to really, 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 really explore what is underneath it, because there are just 10,000 layers of propaganda and disinformation. And I think that, you know, if you take the narrative as it is on its face, what you're going to believe is very, very different. And I think that to really understand the truth of this issue, you have to understand that, and this is what takes people a while to get their heads around. It is possible that the entire world can conspire against a group of people. And if you don't think that's possible, then how has it happened so many times? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, even if you talk about just, Nazi Germany, for example, right? How is it possible that England, Poland, Germany, Spain, Russia, the Middle East, all the Arab countries, Morocco, Tunisia, Iraq, everyone conspired against the Jews at that period of time, and you find it so hard to believe that could still be the case, you know, to the extent that it was a mass extermination, That's how far the propaganda and the anti-Semitism went. But you find it so hard to believe that the New York Times is lying to you, you know?
So why then is the flip? Why is there a turn then on the Jews?
I don't think that it ever went away. So I think that there was the Holocaust era, but people don't understand that the Middle East is not the West. Like, the Middle East didn't have this progressive Enlightenment era where they were like, oh, we shouldn't be anti-Semitic and we shouldn't be racist. The Middle East is racist. You know, it's a racist place. And so anti-Semitism continued throughout the Middle East, which is why Jews were expelled from the Middle East. That's why there are still no Jews in the Middle East, right? Aside from Israel and in Iran, ironically.
There's quite high-ranking members of the Iranian government, right, who are Jewish. Have I got that?
I wouldn't say they were high-ranking members, but there is a Jewish community in Iran. They can live there to an extent of, not being. They just have to. It's almost like the system of dimitude which existed before during the Caliphate era, where it was that a Jew or a Christian person or a person protected by the book would trade their protection for subordination to Islam. So it's the same kind of thing.
How are they treated?
Bad. Yeah. They had to pay a tax. They were killed if they didn't pay the tax. They weren't allowed to.
Still now.
Now it's one of those things where if you mind your own business, I'll leave you alone. But you have to stay small. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I was saying was that so the anti-Semitism never left the Middle East. So the Western world progressed beyond, and had the whole Holocaust education. This is so bad. And what's so funny and ironic and actually very sad is that this whole idea of progressivism and leftistism, whatever you want to call it, all of these ideals actually developed in the wake of the Holocaust, where there was this whole movement where it was like, oh, that was so bad, we should never do this to people again. And so it's funny that wokeism is now being used against the same people it was inspired to not harm again.
Yeah.
Similar to the UN.
Exactly right. International law is this exactly the same thing.
Let's make sure another Holocaust never happens again, and you're literally supporting the jihadists that are. But anyway, so in the Middle East, that continued on. And that's why you had the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, was meeting with Hitler
in Berlin during the war,
because that was the atmosphere, that was the moment, that was the mood of the Middle East at the time, and that is the period of time also that Jews were coming to Palestine for that exact reason. They were being.
So as a side note on that is that. At that time in mandatory Palestine, the opposition to a partition of the land was that, no, we should have one land with al-Husseini as the leader. But the Jews were obviously like, he just was hanging out with Hitler in Berlin. There's no chance we're going to let him be our governor. It's exactly why we don't want that stuff to happen again.
Well, what's interesting, and so this is why I say you really have to know the facts of this to understand that the story that is portrayed in the media is bullshit. What's interesting is that people never talk about there were various requests for there were various proposals for partition. The 1937 Peel Commission. What people don't talk about is the 1939 White Papers. And under the White Papers, an offer was made to the Arabs that it would be one land, one Palestinian Arab land, under Arab rule, where 75,000 Jewish immigrants were allowed to stay. It would be subject to Arab rule, government, everything. They would have to allow Jewish immigration to increase, but it was totally at the discretion of the Arabs, and they rejected it.
Huh.
No partition, because they said we won't have Jews on this land.
Huh.
And they still want to say that this is about the land belonging to Palestine or Arabs or whatever they want to say, when this is a land that we know was ancestrally Jewish land, a land that didn't belong to anybody at the time that states were being formed, a land that Jews and Arabs were both living on, a land that there was even a proposal that you wouldn't partition it and it would be entirely an Arab land. And in the height of the Holocaust and the height of anti-Semitism around the world, of course the answer was no, which is exactly why they were being kicked out from everywhere else. And it's exactly the same reason why this war continues today. And people simply don't understand that this is a continuation of the same anti-Semitism from the 1940s and 30s and 20s.
So I think we'll come back
in the
to
past 2,000 years.
Yeah. We'll come back to the history of it and also the solutions for it, if there are any. But I'm still keen on just understanding how you're different from your peers. I find the same thing. I've seen this in a lot of my contemporaries.
So let's go to that part 2 of the question that you mentioned about the progressives, because that will be where the answer is.
Okay.
So during the period of, and let me temper this by saying that I came from wokeism. Okay.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. I'm like a defector.
Huh.
You know, I came from the hard left, not just the left. Like I came from the left.
So communist?
No.
Socialist?
Yeah, in that. Yeah, I was heading towards that kind of domain.
Well, let me, instead of putting on you, how did your wokeism manifest?
Okay, so I've always been about human rights. That's always been what I've been stood for, and so my interest prior to shifting the tide a little bit to the Middle East, I was working a lot on criminal justice in the US, anti-Black racism, and all of that stuff. So that, to me, it wasn't I can't say that it was a hugely prominent thing until around like George Floyd era, right? That's kind of the era that I noticed everything that to me was very authentic, very grassroots, become just unrecognizable. Silly, just silly, you know?
So from 2020?
I think around then. That's when and then kind of COVID happened and you weren't allowed to ask questions about the vaccine. And then I started to think, you know what, something's not right. Just something's not right, because why can't I just ask questions about the vaccine without being anti-science or, you know? So
with the race stuff, which you were, this is obviously an important issue to you, but at what point, or what would be an example of something silly that that had gone too far, it overreached?
I mean, I don't know, like something that maybe would turn to the extent of we should discriminate against white people or something. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. Just it went from being led by very serious people who had a very serious mission to being overrun by moral narcissists and virtue signalers that just wanted to prove how anti-racist they were, because I guess at that period of time they had been made to feel so much shame that I don't think they knew how to kind of internalize what to do with that shame. So they just started projecting it into this new identity of anti-racism that absolved them of that guilt. And that's where the whole saviorism was born, which I talk about a lot. And so these are the downstream effects of the shame, right?
Yeah.
Turned into saviorism. And so this saviorism is exactly the problem that's been created. So the whole savior narrative is that all there's this oppressor binary. All white people are the oppressors and all people of color are the oppressed. Now, of course, you go to the Middle East, you go to Africa, you know, you go to different places around the world, and you go to China, and it's like, you know, the oppressors are not white people. And they're like, I can't see that. I can't see that, you know? And so out of that narrative, which was just like a hard binary that doesn't reflect the reality, this progressive movement was developed, which was that we have to save all people of color, but we're only saving people of color from white oppressors and white colonizers, right? Because that's the only source of evil in the world. And so what I thought was so silly and ironic and awful about everything that it had become was that you're literally watching Assad in Syria, the Islamic Republic in Iran, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Sudan, like Afghanistan, China, you name it. You're watching these massacres in the millions right in front of you, and you do not give a rat's behind because it's not a white oppressor. So actually, you don't care about people of color, as you claim. You care about a vendetta against this thing that you've decided is the form of evil, which is the white oppressor. And that is why everything that you're doing is about you. It's always been about you. And you're so concerned with Western imperialism. And, you are the Eurocentrist. You are the American centrist. That is literally navel gazing out into the world.
Yes, because we are, of course, talking about, I guess, white liberals here. We're not talking about, let's say, the Muslim population of Britain right now, right?
Right. I mean, and the thing is, like, if you were to talk about the Muslim population of Britain or whatever, that's just their views. Do you know what I mean? Like, those are just their views because that's where they come from and that's what they believe, which is very different to like a white liberal progressive person that's like has no reason to have any beliefs about the Middle East. So why are you going in the direction of this versus that? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so to get to the heart of it then, it's this oppressor-oppressed narrative, which is kind of essentially Marxist and postmodernist. And that's kind of what you think the source of it is.
Definitely both Marxist and postmodernist. And then you have that alliance with the Marxists and the jihadists, which really sharpens the focus on how we get to where we are.
And that alliance being what you've already described.
Yeah, so the alliance between the Marxists and the jihadists is that the Marxist goal is obviously class destruction, but also just destruction of much of what is considered the Western world, right, which is capitalism. Because, during the Cold War era, that was what the war was. It was communism versus capitalism. And obviously the Marxist socialist thing coming from the communist side. So the whole idea is that we need to do away with the Western capitalist world. Well, how are we going to do that, right? And so Marxists see the jihadists as the reactionary force that is going to destroy the Western world. So they're like, oh, these jihadists want death to America as well. That's cool. We like that. Let's support them. But in the final instance, because the jihadists and the Marxists, which are hard left and hard right, will clash in the end, they'll end up killing each other anyway. So that's why I say that it's a marriage of convenience. It's not a marriage of love. Yeah. And we actually saw that materialize in Iran. So in Iran, the revolution that happened in 1979 was precisely through that. There was the university students in Iran started reading about communism. There was a party in Iran called the Tudeh Party, which was the Communist Party. These are the people that fomented the revolution or the coup that brought in the Islamic Republic. So the Marxists and the jihadists aligned there. And then when the Islamic regime came to Iran, the first people they killed were the communists. So,
Okay. There's another aspect to it. And now back to the still remaining on the question is, why is it our generation think a certain way? But this, I think, might apply more to America. You've said that, I've seen in researching for this
America is superiorly diseased.
Say that again.
America is superiorly diseased.
By what we've already described?
The brain rot, yes.
The brain rot of this ideology.
Yes.
Yeah. But so you've gone further than that, in that you've said that Iran have been playing a long game to try and take down America from within.
Yes.
I want to understand that. What does that mean?
Well, first, let me just say the Islamic Republic, I don't call them Iran because,
Forgive me.
Yeah, it's okay. So the long game is that if you want to take down America, much less any other country, much less the most protected country that you can think of militarily, right? You're not going to bomb America. You're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to kill people into, changing the way that they think and inviting in different ideologies and regimes. The only way that you can dismantle America is from within. And so this is what the long game has been about. It has been about priming the American audiences, or Western audiences in general, particularly American audiences, because this is where you have a hub of people who are very vulnerable to this notion of anti-Westernism, right? Because America is, the place that has conducted so much of what they hate about, the Western world. So much of it has been conducted by America. It's like they call it like the, I don't know, something empire. I don't know. So, there's been this priming process over decades where there's been a lot of money and a lot of resources invested in American Western academia, academic institutions, millions from Islamic Republic, from Qatar. And it's kind of bred this leftist way of thinking where, hey, we in the West, we've been thinking about this whole thing so wrong. We've been, broad brushing these people as terrorists and jihadists, but really all they were doing this whole time was just resisting Western imperialism. They were just like this, resistance force to American, war and bombs and sanctions. And they're actually the good guys. They're the good guys that we've mistaken for the bad guys. And so that way of thinking has, they've primed American audiences to think about that for so long now, especially when you get into these Ivy League institutions like the Columbias, those are the kind of institutions that they really, really instill this hard leftist way of thinking. And so then you get a generation of people now who are like...
Sorry, who's the they?
Which part?
They've been trying to instill these ideas in the people.
So yes, I can say the regime in Iran, but in general, it's the alliance of Islamists, in particular the regime in Iran that is, kind of like the head of the snake, along with these left-wing.
Right. Okay, so let me focus then on the regime.
Mm-hmm.
Is this through the National Iranian American Council?
NIAC. So NIAC, yes.
Well, what are the means then that they're doing this?
So they actually have, this has been written about extensively. There were court cases that kind of revealed that NIAC had traded extensive correspondence with the regime, despite saying that it hadn't. And there are articles where they wrote about the fact that the founder of NIAC had corresponded with Javad Zarif, who was the former foreign minister of the regime, talking about how to kind of bring this idea to the Western left, the anti-war crowd, the anti-imperialist crowd, that the idea that, we should not go to war with Iran, we should not be against the regime, that we should be doing diplomacy with the regime. So that was one of the ways through NIAC that they were kind of proliferating this idea that the best thing to do is to do diplomacy with the regime, and also to push this idea that if we didn't get into another JCPOA, if we didn't get into another oil deal with the regime, that there would be a war with the regime, which was not true because we came out of the JCPOA and there was no war. Yeah. So it was through a series of things. Then there was the Iran Experts Initiative, which was an article that came out in Semaphore last year, which I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, which they again revealed a network of the regime's influence in the Pentagon. So, you have this like level of infiltration from the White House to the Pentagon. And
well, we should come back to it, and this, I want to ask you about geopolitics, but we haven't quite finished this, I think, but because talking about Iranian influence, the regime's influence in the States, there's been several attempts, intelligence have reported several attempts to try and kill Trump from the regime. So I'm trying to get a sense of how...
Not just Trump, all of us.
Sure. Missy Alinejad has been on the show. She's had several attempts on her life whilst living on American soil. Have there been attempts? You say all of us, there's been attempts?
So there's phases of their attacks. The early phase is the character assassination online. So I'm in the phase one, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So how are they doing? They do trolls on social media?
Oh, I'm a spy. I work for Mossad. I work for the IRGC. I work for the CIA. I work for the FBI.
Huh. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
all of them,
it doesn't escalate
by the way.
From there. Although presumably the more powerful your voice and the louder your voice,
that is a huge component of what it means to continue pursuing this.
But you're choosing to do so.
I mean, I have no choice.
Well, you did have a choice.
I mean, what's going to happen if I stop? Like, what can I just watch this happen again? What happened to Iran? The last places that we have safe to be from it.
Yeah. So before just moving on from understanding the ideology of contemporaries and the rest of your peers, because it's a problem that I see, I don't quite know how to solve, and it seems to be that it might get worse.
Oh.
No?
So much.
You agree?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what the solution is for that. This applies just as much in London as it does here in Los Angeles. How do you get people out of this ideology? Because essentially it is an ideology. It's a worldview.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they need to be massively red-pilled. So it's difficult because the thing is that all of the things that so I mean, my easy answer to you is education, right? The easy answer is like, oh, well, we just educate people, and then once they understand, they'll stop believing these things, which is obviously true. But the problem is that people who have gone into these cults, because they are cults, they aren't really exactly willing to listen to what any of us would have to say.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The only thing that I can say is like, for myself, you know, I think that things became so absurd for me at a point that I started to investigate, you know, this way of thinking can't be, you know, right. And so I think my own curiosity pulled me out of it. But honestly,
wait, did you feel this way about the Israel-Palestine issue before? When you said earlier you were a bit woke?
No. I was pro-Palestine.
You were pro-Palestine?
Yes.
Why were you pro-Palestine?
Because that's just what I believed.
And
you know?
So it wasn't something you'd necessarily investigated. It was just your instincts were pro-Palestine.
I think, you know, it just from a human rights perspective, you know, it was like, and this was something that I didn't understand the full extent of course I didn't understand the full extent of what was going on back then. But from a human rights perspective, I would just see things online and I'd be like, oh, I'm not okay with this, you know, and that, you know, I believed that their land had been stolen. I believed all of this stuff that I was told, that I was taught. And then I slowly started to research and investigate and learn and speak to experts and academics and read books. And I was like, I think it was then that I started to understand that the way that this had been presented to me it wasn't totally honest. You know, it wasn't a totally honest presentation. You know, like I think about the map, you know, the map that is like the map of Palestine.
Yeah.
And then it's like the shrinking map of Palestine. And it's like that wasn't totally honest because I didn't know at that time that there was never a place or a state called Palestine, that this was just a name that the Romans had given to this land that Jews and Arabs were living on. And it was like, but I mean, that's just one tiny example.
Well, that's an important example because it's always doing around the social media. A vicar I know, even recently in London, posted that map up. He posted it on October 7th, the 1-year anniversary of all times. The map is completely historically illiterate.
And it's deceptive. But like, when you understand things like this, when you learn things like this, it makes you question, why was I told that?
Yeah.
That's not true. So why was I told something that wasn't true? And then you start scratching under the surface for all the other things. And then you're like, none of this is true. Yeah. Like none of this is true. I don't understand why we all believe something that isn't true and why there isn't this massive debunking process.
Yeah.
You know, does nobody care about truth?
When did your Israel red pill moment happen? Before October 7th?
It started to happen before October 7th because during the Woman Life Freedom movement, the only people that actually stood up with Iranians were Israelis. And that was very like, oh, you know, it was a suddenly unexpected allies showing up. And then so I started to develop relationships and friendships with fellow Jews. I mean, not fellow Jews, I'm not Jewish, with Jews. And at that time, I was following their content. So I would follow their content. And this was pre-October 7th, of course. So I was, you know, learning. I was learning the things that they were sharing. And I was asking a lot of questions. I was like, but I thought that XYZ, but then they were showing different things. And I was like, I started to understand that maybe what I thought before wasn't necessarily totally true. But I will say this. Even on October 7th, from October 7th to now, even during this past year, my position has been constantly developing as I learn more and more and more and scratch even more and more and more under the surface and realize really how many layers there are to this. And I don't think it was until maybe like 7 months in from October 7th that I called my friend Matthew Nuriel, who's Jewish, and I said to him, babes, I've just had the biggest, most unbelievable wake-up call of all time, and I figured it all out. He goes, what? I was like, okay, so basically, I figured out that everyone just hates Jews. And he was like, he just was like cracking up laughing. He was like, wait, you just figured that out? I was like, wait, you knew? And he was like, babe. I was like, wait, everyone knows. He's like,
yeah, Jews know.
Everyone knows. And it was like, but it really took me that long, you know, because even because I'm a very, very, very critical thinker. I don't care. Like, if someone comes to me with any information about anything, I'm like, I need to investigate this. I'm not going to just buy anything. And so my mind for at least 7 months was like, there's got to be a different explanation. Like, and then I explored 10,000 every other explanation that I could possibly find. And it was just like, nope, 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 nope. And then finally it was like, there really is no other explanation, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we joke that everyone knows, but I think after October 7th, a lot of progressives and liberal Jewish people had a dark awakening about, and there's prominent examples in this country, but I think of Bill Ackman as a case, but
did he say that?
I don't know if that was a turning point, but it seems to be the moment that he started speaking out more.
It's interesting. I met with him last week, actually.
Yeah. How did that go?
Good. I didn't ask him that question.
There's other prominent Jews that have come out after that moment who maybe didn't come before, and that seems to me to have been.
There were a lot of. I can say that for sure. There were a lot of, there were a lot of Jews in my DMs that would say, October 7th changed me. Even some of my close Jewish friends my close friends that I'm friends with now who are Jewish, also had a huge, huge, huge turning point on October 7th. And I think it was because, it wasn't even because of Israel and Palestine, it was because of the anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So I think had whatever was happening in the Middle East been happening and there wasn't this anti-Semitism here, it could have gone differently. But I think just waking up to that onslaught of just horrific anti-Semitism was like, oh, they just really hate us.
Yeah.
You know?
A quick interruption to your show. If you would like exclusive content, exclusive interviews, and exclusive videos, come over to the Winston Marshall Substack. It's at winstonmarshall.co.uk, and there you can interact with me directly. It's winstonmarshall.co.uk, and you'll find links in the comments below. But back to the interview.
Going back to your personal story, when did you start... when did you emerge? When did you start doing media about this specific thing?
I started on social media in 2021. No, sorry. I was always on social media. But in 2021, and I can't tell you why, but I remember I was walking my dog one day. I was living in Orange County at the time. And like something in my brain was just like, make a TikTok account. And I was like, where did that come from? And at the time, I just thought TikTok was like for like children dancing on TikTok. That was the only thing I knew about it. But I was like, okay, fine, voice in my head, I'll do that. So I remember making a video and it was like, I don't know what it was about. It was something probably to do with criminal justice. And I woke up the next day and my video had like 2,000 likes and I had just created an account, 0 followers, whatever. And then within 3 months, I had 100,000 followers.
What kind of videos were you putting up?
Just social justice, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you built a huge following as a social justice sort of activist.
Yeah.
Ah.
So then by the time the Iran stuff happened, which was 2022, by that time I had like almost 400,000 followers on TikTok.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But then my account just got completely shadow banned because, you know.
Since October 7th?
No.
Oh, over Iran?
Iran stuff, yeah. It's like China, TikTok, Iran, whatever.
Yeah. And it would have after October 7th as well. Because China have been deliberately...
I got off TikTok.
Yeah, good.
I got off TikTok after October 7th.
Huh.
I couldn't. There was no space for me there anymore. That's why I only use Instagram and X now.
Okay. And so then you made the similar sort of content, but
yes,
this time not so social justice-y, or rather a different type of justice.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it is social justice. It's just they have a different idea what social is.
Yeah.
I guess we disagree with each other at this point.
Yeah. I want to turn to geopolitics, if I may. I think you're going to have some insight, particularly on Iran, which I'm very interested in. But obviously at this point, we're talking in the war. It's what Netanyahu's achieved against what even most Israelis thought was possible. He's defeated the high command of Hamas, of Hezbollah. Last week, 2 weeks ago, it was Sinwar in Rafah. We're here in America. I want to just ask what your opinion is on the approach, the difference between the Kamala, Blinken, Biden, and I'd say Obama. You mentioned the JCPOA earlier, the famous Iran deal, and Trump, as this applied with Jared Kushner when he was president, and the possibility of a new Trump presidency, although it might be the case that we publish this after the election. But I want to just compare those two approaches to the Middle East and what you think's better. So Obama, there's not a bad starting point, the JCPOA. Obama, and with the famous Iran deal, Trump pulling out. Like you said earlier in this conversation, there was no war as a result of pulling out. There's even... let's start with JCPOA. What's your take on the JCPOA? Was there any value to it at all?
No. So the JCPOA, to me, I think I've had my own red pill moments over the years where I realized that the difference between a Democrat and a Republican president at certain points during our modern history would have made Iran free by this time. So in 2009, there was something called the Green Movement in Iran, where it was like, it looked very much like the Women Life Freedom movement. The people of Iran rose up again against this terrorist regime. And that was the precise moment that there was a thought in the American psyche that maybe they would help the people of Iran. And Jay Solomon writes about this in his book, The Iran Wars, that the CIA was on the ground in Iran, and they were contemplating whether to arm the protesters. So now at that time, Obama comes into office and he appoints Nyack as his White House advisor. Nyack that has just been revealed by the FBI to be in violation of FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or, sorry, let me just be specific, possibly in violation, following that court case where they've discovered that he's been in correspondence with the regime, right? Sorry, Nyack has been. And they drop the investigation, they're appointed to the White House, and then this deal is encouraged to give $150 billion to this regime. I don't know if people understand how much money $150 billion is. I mean, you could build a country with that money. So, or I should say frozen assets. So, and you also have to think about the kickback that comes from that exchange, right? I mean, 10% at least is a lot of money. So what happens is that the regime...
Kickback to who?
To America.
Huh.
Of course, right?
Who in America?
I mean, whoever is making these deals, right?
Right.
They're not doing it without any incentive. So,
the other thing about the killer about that deal, and this is what I picked up, I think I picked this up from Barak Ravid. He wrote a book called Trump's Peace, but he examines JCPOA. And when Obama made that deal, he knew that they were going to still be experimenting with nuclear, and it didn't actually mean anything.
Yeah.
So it was essentially pointless. It was for show.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that's necessarily fair. I kind of want a second opinion on that.
I saw that there were some German intelligence reports that showed that that the regime was cheating on the deal, and that the Obama administration deliberately pretended not to know about it because of how bad that would look. But anyway, the point is, at that time, the regime was being significantly weakened because of the uprising. And so there was this moment where the Obama administration was like, okay, are we going to help the people of Iran and take this regime out, which it could have been done and dusted there and then? or are we going to do diplomacy with this regime, influenced by its White House advisor, Nyack, right? And that's exactly the direction that it took. And so, you know, the same sort of thing happens after, almost identical, to be honest. Trump pulls out of the JCPOA and puts on the maximum pressure campaign. And you see at that time that the regime's oil exports are low, the sanctions are high, it's becoming financially, economically crippled. And then the Women Life Freedom movement kicks off in 2022. Now, when Biden comes in, Biden starts to lax on enforcing these sanctions. And then the regime's oil exports in 2022 reached the highest that it had reached in the past 5 years.
Just if I may, on the Biden thing, he unfroze $6 billion worth of assets in South Korea. Only a matter of weeks before October 7th, although maybe that's later in the story. No,
that all counts. So they do this ransom deal for actually $7 billion, where, you know, they say that this $7 billion is going to humanitarian relief. Well, the sanctions, first of all, didn't prohibit the use of the money for humanitarian relief. So that was always a loophole. That was always an exception to the sanctions, was that money could always be used for humanitarian relief. So the $7 billion, well, first of all, it was a 5-for-5 prisoner exchange. So 5 Iranians for 5 Americans. And it was like, what was the need for the money? You know, because under Trump, you know, Shiwei Wang and Michael White were both released in Iran. They'd been held by the regime for 2 Iranians in American prisons, and there was no money. There was no need for any money. It was just an agreement 2 for 2, right? And the regime, when the regime tried that, we want money. Obviously, you know, Trump said, "Fafo," right?
Is that a quote?
I don't know if that was his word for word what he said.
He did actually say something like that.
But you know what happened? Then they were on the first plane back to America, right? And so then we get to the question, okay, now we're talking about Biden giving $7 billion to the regime. First of all, they say, okay, this money is just for humanitarian relief. Well, you know that money is fungible. So if you are giving $7 billion here, where they would have used that money they would have otherwise used their money for humanitarian relief, which they don't, whatever, they're now going to be using for domestic and regional terror. And we explained this on Twitter for months. And then after October 7th happened, where we were like, hey, they're going to use this money to commit terrorism at home and in the Middle East, then they refroze the money, you know? And it was like, yeah, we told you that. But so what was clear from that transaction, and in fact, I think it was Qatar. I think it was one of the Qatari experts that were involved in that $7 billion deal that actually came down and said that was pretty much like a nest egg, like to lay the foundation for the next nuclear deal.
Okay. So Kamala, we'll come back to Trump, I guess. But Kamala has just said, I don't know if you saw the interview she did on Fox, but she was asked who's the greatest enemy of America. And her answer was Iran. What did you make of that? Do you think that Iran is, or the regime, excuse me,
it's okay,
is the greatest threat to America?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
More
it
than
is.
China?
I can't, I guess it's one of those things where I can only talk about what I know. Maybe China is a bigger threat, but I don't know enough about China to say that. Okay. From my world, the world that I know, this is a terrorist regime that has more power than it should have. And it wishes death to America explicitly. I think here's what I think about that. The Democrats have a long history of diplomacy and appeasement with this terrorist regime, giving money to this terrorist regime. And when even we can go further back from Obama and even talk about Carter, who helped bring in this regime. and take out the Shah. I think any democratic candidate today has to, I don't just want to hear words. There has to be a grand departure from the practices of the past several decades. You can't just say, okay, that's nice. That's nice that you said that the regime is the biggest threat to America, but how are you demonstrating that? Okay, so your national security advisor is Philip Gordon, who we know wrote a book that against regime change in the Middle East. Is that still your national security advisor? Does that national security advisor still have the same beliefs? Are they still, because if you don't support regime change, then you have to support diplomacy with that regime. So where are the actions? Like how are you showing us that you are treating this as an enemy and not a friend anymore? You know, because this habit of treating them like a friend, this appeasement, is exactly what has brought us to October 7th. And I say that I don't think that we're going to survive another round of appeasement. I think this will be the last appeasement. Like the Last Supper. I say the last appeasement. There will be like posters about it and like art about it if it doesn't.
Well, the regime might possibly come to an end during this war, but
that's what we're hoping.
Well, before we get to that very exciting conversation, just on Trump, do you have any criticisms or appraisals of Trump's approach to the regime?
So I have found that what's really worked for me is to stay out of politics. And that sounds stupid because it sounds like all I do is politics. It's really not. I really very rarely discuss American politics because I honestly, if I'm being quite candid, I just don't think that I care enough because I've never seen it. Whatever, doesn't matter.
But I'm just talking about his approach to Trump's approach. So I'm not talking about domestic policy.
No, I understand.
Just his geopolitical approach to Iran, which was to get out of the JCPOA.
Yep. Definitely superior approach.
He's targeted assassinations.
Soleimani.
Soleimani, exactly. So that approach, is that something that is the correct way to deal with the regime? He, in fact, in an interview last week, he said, I think it was on Flagrant with Andrew Schultz. He said something like, wherever it was, we don't necessarily want to get rid of the regime.
Who said that?
Trump. He said,
he said the same thing before 2016. He said that he had no interest in going to war with the regime, and then he assassinated Soleimani. I think he just does what he thinks or feels like in the moment.
Okay. Well, let's come to the possibility that the regime comes to an end now. Given the success of Netanyahu in eliminating the head of the entire high command of Hezbollah, although there continues to be bombardment in Lebanon, and Hamas, as I already mentioned, Sinwar. And was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, there was an assassination attempt by the regime on Netanyahu in Israel. What should his approach be? What should Netanyahu and Israel, what should their approach be to the regime? Should they do the same thing as these other enemies and try and get rid of the regime? So
it looks like the plan, or what I'm hearing, is that they would target military facilities in Iran. I think so. The way that I think there's a general consensus now among actually really people across the spectrum from the left to the right, because, historically this idea of regime change in the Middle East has today in contemporary kind of geopolitics, it is viewed as very unfavorable. It's like, you know what, that didn't really work. And every time we tried to do it, it turned out awfully, or we got the blame or whatever. So I think a balance that kind of feels like it sits well with everyone is that there's some action that weakens the regime significantly, and that the people of Iran rise up and take the regime out themselves. So I get the sense that from the words of from what Netanyahu said, from what the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has said, and from experts on Iran and the Middle East in general, I get the sense that that's the favorable approach. A weakening of the IRGC, potentially a strike on the military facilities, and then the people of Iran have the final blow, the final swing of the sword that takes out the head of the dragon.
Okay. But as long as that last thing happens, though, because if it'd be a bit like the approach to Hamas, unless you actually get rid of Hamas.
Oh, they're not.
There's not really a conversation.
No, you don't have to tell them twice.
Right. So we're back to Israel itself. There has the feeling in Israel when I was there earlier in the year is that people have given a lot of people whoever, even those who previously did believe in a two-state solution, is now very cynical or very skeptical about that being at all possible, given what happened on October 7th. What's your take on that? What do you think a post-war peace settlement looks like? A practical one?
You know, I think I got to a point recently within the last couple of months that I actually felt really sad for the Palestinians, because I felt that there's just no two states coming anymore. There's just no two states, because what these jihadists have done has really just completely made sure to take it off the table. And I think for a while in the beginning, especially, I was really hopeful for two states. And then as time passed, I was like, this just isn't going to happen. And especially because, you know, you have to want it. And I don't get the sense that is. So I think...
You don't get the sense that those in the West Bank or Gaza actually want a two-state?
No, I don't.
Palestinian Arabs don't want a two-state?
I mean, they say they don't.
Yeah, quite.
You know, they say that. So that's what makes the solution so tough, because it's like, you know, we've seen and explored the peace deals that were offered over a long period of time. And, you know, I read something in a book. It was Einat Wilf's book, The War of Return, where she said something that I thought was very interesting, where she said something about how for Israelis, peace is more than just like a nice thought or whatever. It's something that it's an imperative for them, because every time that there is no peace, every time that there's war, it's like, it's their soldiers, it's their people, it's the terrorism, it's the attacks, like they're dying, right? So they actually Israelis have an active interest in peace, not a passive one, right? And so you look at all the offers that have been put on the table before, and you think about the fact that the other side hasn't negotiated back with those offers, just flat out rejected them, right? And then it's just kind of like, I think it's that rejectionism that is testimony to the fact that they don't want it. And so I don't know what you do in a situation where one side just doesn't want anything that's put on the table except something that isn't workable.
Back to America. Oh, actually, before we get to America, I want to know what your position is on free speech. You're British, so in Britain, we don't have much free speech at all these days, but relevant to this is that showing support of prescribed terrorist groups like Hamas is illegal. And so that would not fly in this country, which has got much stricter free speech rules or protections. In this country, we have seen protests from Columbia University up all across the country, anti-Israel protests, but punishment for those protesters. I wanted to get your take. No, you don't think so? Well, I'll give you an immediate example, is that there was, at Columbia University, an anti-Israel group has been banned from Instagram. As well as that, there was their
Instagram page was banned.
The Instagram page was banned, but
I
there was
wouldn't
also...
say that was a punishment. It's not like they felt any... Were they kicked out of school? No.
There's one activist who was kicked out of school, at least. And I think it was in Austin, there was some removal of people from campuses. I just wanted to know what your take on that was. Should these anti-Israel voices be protected? What's the line for you about what is not acceptable or acceptable?
So I'm a huge proponent of free speech. I think the issue with free speech is that we're living in a different reality than we were when the Constitution was crafted. And that reality is social media, and that reality is reaching people at to a much greater extent than we would have ever thought possible when we were talking about these notions of free speech. And so, when I think about absolute free speech, I think of the Holocaust. I think of the fact that this man was able to say whatever he wanted, as much as he wanted, to whoever he wanted, and that's where that ended for me. So I'm not a free speech absolutist.
Who are you referring to, sorry?
Hitler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So I think that I'm very mindful about the fact that, okay, we absolutely need a good amount of free speech, especially having been in America for a little bit of time. I am admittedly kind of Americanized with those values. But then I think the age of information and the way that anyone can go online now and just share any disinformation and get like 200,000-300,000 likes on a complete disinformation post. Okay, these are the things that lead to future Holocausts or future, I don't know what you want to call them, intifadas. I don't believe that should go without regulation. And so I think that we need to start drawing lines on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I think that support for this level of intolerance, then there needs to be some lines drawn there. So I've thought about it a lot, and I think that there's two ways that this can be approached. If you have these disinformation campaigns, either they can be met with in fact, government initiated, like in a serious response of debunking and re-education, or there has to be laws around it.
So, but who makes the laws? I mean, that's a slippery slope, don't you think?
That is a slippery slope, and that's the problem.
And so one day you're censoring things that you deem to be disinformation. The next day you're censored by people who deem you to be spreading disinformation. Well,
that's why I think the lines have to really be drawn on things that can be quite clear-cut, like, for example, something that's listed as on the FTO, the Foreign Terrorist Organization list. But then again, you're going to have people say, well, Nelson Mandela was on the list and blah, 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 blah. So you can't win that way either, really.
Yeah. So what is exactly the line that
It's tough. I don't know. But the way I see it is that, look, these jihadists are not Nelson Mandela. Let's just put it that way. And I think that there should be consequences for supporting terrorist regimes. I do.
And there are in Britain. And what do you think about community notes on X? Because that seems to me a great thing where you're not censoring.
Yeah.
I've been community noted on X.
Yeah.
I've been proved wrong. I left my tweet up because it's brilliant. Look, I've been corrected and now everyone can see the truth.
Here's the problem.
So I think that's a good thing.
Here's the problem. I think if we were dealing with a normal, like any regular situation, we wouldn't need to think this far about it, because you're absolutely right. Things like community notes, just the ability to push back, right? You say something stupid, ridiculous, 1,000 people push back, you feel silly and you don't say it again. Great. The problem is that we are significantly outnumbered, disinformation to truth. And so I just don't know that, we can win this any other way.
Let's go. Let me take you back to our country, Britain.
Great Britain.
And seeing of your Iranian background, I wonder if you might have good insight, positive insight on something that I'm worried about our country, which, so Henry Jackson Society at the beginning of this year did a polling of British Muslims and found that 3/4 of British Muslims do not believe that rape or murder occurred by Hamas or was perpetrated by Hamas on October 7th, despite Hamas themselves gloating and boasting that they did so. So and so that's 3 million out of 4 million British Muslims. That for me is concerning, not least because there's huge rising tensions between non-British Muslims and British Muslims. And best exemplified, who could forget, by the riots in August across the country, which were anti-Islam in nature, including mosques being attacked. Being of Iranian background, do you have a positive vision about how to unite non-Muslims and Muslims in Britain?
Well, I think that so the British Muslims that said that they believe XYZ about Hamas, I don't think that that's different to what most people in England think. Like when I think about my friends that were all, on the left in England, they also would have said the same things like, oh, Hamas are being wrongfully demonized. So I wonder, how reflective that is of just the general kind of leftist sentiment in England. And I think it is quite popular. It's a quite popular belief in England that Hamas, in London, at least from what I know, my friends, my community that I came from, that Hamas are, I don't know if I can say necessarily the good guys, but of the two, of Hamas and Israel, they would take the side of Hamas. So I think...
So there's nothing to worry about because the British Muslims will fit right in with all the lefties who think exactly the same way.
Yes, exactly. So I think actually what you're dealing with in London, and I say London because I can only speak about London, I can't speak about all of England from my own experience, is kind of similar to what you're dealing with in America, which is that it's just, it is a progressive mindset that has aligned with the Muslim mindset.
The Red-Green Alliance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to say that it's all Muslims because I say that it's the jihadist mindset, because I like to make a distinction. But if that's what 3/4 of
It's definitely not all Muslims. On this show, we had Ed Hussein, who was a great peace-seeking Muslim who was even in Israel on October 7th and described sharing a bunker with Israelis through that terrible event.
So and this is the problem. I think that what's funny about it is that these people are all out of touch with the Middle East. Even Muslims who are not living in the Middle East to an extent, I really just, like, for example, if you take these moderate Muslim countries like UAE, for example, right? UAE is a really good example of a country that has really strict anti-terrorism laws, right? It's like all of these terrorist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever, they're designated as terrorist groups. Any support for them is, heavily prosecuted. They have de-radicalization programs. They've really outlawed extremism because they don't want that. People of the Middle East understand what happens when that's allowed to flourish, right? Because statistically, Muslims are actually the first victims of jihadism and the biggest victims of jihadism. And so any Middle Eastern person that you tell me, has some degree of support for jihad, I'm like, well, they don't understand the Middle East then. They must have left a long time ago, or they don't have any... because Middle Easterners know better than anyone. And so that to me is just, it's very difficult to understand why the only reason that Middle Eastern people can be in support of jihadist groups is because they don't know jihad. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'd add to that, and I've said this before many times on the show, I think the Emiratis are a beacon of light in the Middle East. I think that they are the future of peace between the West and the Arab world. Mohammed bin Zayed being the greatest amongst a bunch of great men. You're absolutely right. The Saudis as well, they have jihad rehab ever since Osama,
exactly.
the Al-Qaeda attacks.
And that's the way to do it.
2003, I think it was.
Yeah, that is the way to do it,
But
And
it
that's
seems to be
why
a different
they
story in Britain, though. It's Muslims in Britain that don't take the same position.
And so that's what I'm saying, like the people that actually live in like these moderate Muslim countries in the Middle East, I say that as compared to, like Iran, for example, which I mean, the people of Iran are against the regime, but the regime itself is clearly not a moderate regime. But, these people that live in moderate Muslim countries, they understand because they felt firsthand the experience of jihadism left unchecked. And so you almost have to wonder, like, who is influencing who in the UK? Are the progressives leading this charge? Like, how do you get people to... I don't know. It's weird.
Forgive me for asking a personal question, but are you a Muslim?
I come from a Muslim family, I guess you could say, like most Iranians do. But I think that the Islamic Republic has really ruined that for a lot of Iranians, I guess you could say. But like my grandparents were practicing. My granddad was like praying several times a day. My parents, not so much. So in Muslim in name, not so much in practice.
Do you think that there's what does the future relations look like? Peaceful relations, let's say, Iran without the regime. Is there a Shia Muslim leadership that
No, you can't have a theocracy in Iran. No.
But it is still, the country is still, so what would you have instead? The king?
A democracy, or a constitutional monarchy, or a little bit of both.
Okay.
But I do not think it could be a religious government. No, absolutely not.
But it's still a religious country. It's still a very religious country.
No, I don't think so.
Is it not?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Yeah, the most recent surveys show that no. The Shia religious population of Iran is a very small percentage.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I'll ask you one last question, again, a personal one. I hope you don't mind and don't feel obliged to answer it. But you've described already how the bots have been coming after you. But I wondered if there were other repercussions for being so vocal as you have been, and whether they be professional or social, because we speak to a lot of people who speak out on this show, and there are always consequences.
I mean, look, there's just to put it to you, like there's no period of time where I'm not being harassed. Like there's no period of time where I'm not being harassed somewhere. But I will say this, and as we talked about, like the IRGC bots and the online attacks, the character assassination, the spy, this, that, and the other. But I think oddly, there is this kind of freedom that comes with like going as far as you can go with something, where it's like, I think in the beginning where I was really trying my best to be very, very balanced, I was constantly under attack because I was offending somebody. I was always offending somebody. And I think that after it got to the point where, like, I said what I said, I got blocked by my friends, nobody wanted to be my friend anymore. Everyone was like, you just go run off with the Zionists, whatever. It's like, at this point, what more can you do to me? So I think that there's this, like, strange liberation in being quote unquote cancelled, where it's like, well, there's no more power in that for you. You can't dangle this thing over my head where you're going to take, something from me. You're going to take my social currency. You're going to take my respect, my reputation. Like, you've done all of those things. So really, what can you do to me anymore? And so, yeah, I guess I'm in a strange place where I'm just very free.
Wow. Real liberation.
Yeah.
And I hope that you find even better friends on your journey, and they'll love you for you.
I hope so.
That's the aspiration. Elica Lebon, a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. Those are fantastic answers and fascinating insight into Iran and the Middle East. And it's very inspiring to watch you, and all the best with all your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show. That was Elica Le Bon. If you enjoyed that, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press like, comment, and subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Elica discussing the issues you want to hear about and the mainstream media won't touch. But until next time, be well.